Okay. Venerable Robina is an Australian nun ordained in the late 70s, a full-time employee and student of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. She was editorial director of Wisdom Publications, editor of Mandala Magazine, and executive director of Liberation Prison Project. She is an active global touring teacher of Buddhism.
Okay, thanks, Lou. So in case we haven't met before, Carol's there. Everyone, I think I know everybody. There's Lucy. There's Kim. Happy to see you all. So what's on the agenda today, I wonder? Is there any burning topic someone would like to ask about? Talk, what's on someone's mind? Maybe say something, we can get it started. What do you think, somebody? If there's something on your mind. Yes, Lucy, what's on your mind?
Patience.
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 Okay, it's a really good topic. Thank you so much. I know it's a wonderful, it's a word that somehow I think we don't like, you know. It feels, I think why is because it feels like you got to sort of squash yourself and or suppress something, you know, suppress something and kind of grit your teeth and wait for that horrible thing to go away. It doesn't feel comfortable. And usually when people say it to us, it's really rude. Oh, be patient, they say. It's kind of heavy, isn't it? So, I mean, let's look at it because actually it's quite an advanced practice. And I think there's two levels of it. And this is always, of course, taking the typical Buddhist approach, which we often don't, well, yeah, I mean, we hear it in our culture, but it doesn't seem to work. So it's a really important one. The first one, the very first one, is at least don't say the words. I mean, this is pretty incredible. At least don't say the words. Because once we all know, once the words are out of the mouth, the damage is done. The damage is really done, and you really can't take it back. You know, we know that it's there, it's very strong. So this is something that we find quite complicated, quite difficult in our way of approach in the world, because we assume that if you don't say it, it'll kind of get all kind of, you'll have to boil it, it'll all be boiling up inside and you go crazy. In other words, in our culture, we seem to think you have to vomit it all out or completely suppress. I think they're almost like the only two options for us. But this is really not true. Once we understand, you know, I mean, this is the Buddhist approach and it's common sense if you think about it, you know, the third approach, I mean, the ideal one, the best one is not to say the words because that damages, the damage is done and you really feel bad about it. The person has heard it and it's hard to fix. So that's the first one. Then we think if I don't say it, I've got to sit on it, like I said. But no, that's the point. If we take the Buddhist approach, we learn, you know, by learning to first discipline, the idea of disciplining our body and speech, but then coming along with that is a real awareness of what's going on in our mind. And the ideal is eventually to have the awareness of what's going on in our mind before it is forced out of the mouth. That's the skill. And that's what, you know, Lama Yeshe, we quoting Lama Yeshe all the time, we have to learn to be our own therapist. And that's the inner work. That's the work of, you know, learning to see our mind before it vomits out. But I think that's not something that we think is a useful thing in our culture. We really feel there's an incredible benefit in saying the words, because I think we don't have very good techniques for listening to the thoughts properly. And we don't, if we do hear the thoughts, we don't really have good methods for processing them. We feel if we feel that we have to vomit them out, then the person we have to talk about to the other person. But 90% of the time, the other person does not need to hear these words. And that's the real Buddhist approach is the more we have a simple meditation practice every day, the more we observe our own thoughts, the more we have this skill to be able to hear the unhappy conceptual story, and then we can learn to argue with it. Basically, that's being a Buddhist. It sounds rather peculiar, but that's really being a Buddhist. You learn to hear the conceptual story that informs the anger, and then you learn to change it in your own thoughts. That's the perfect practice. But actually, it's really advanced. You've got to be really learn to have such discipline not to say the words, you know. So that's the first one. And why that's so good isn't just because it's suppressing. It's because it's, you know, every time you say the words, you've just done the act. Not only have you done the damage to the other person, but you've actually increased your own anger. We have this feeling of saying the words lessens the anger. It sort of has to come out, otherwise it'll boil over. No, you increase your anger, because then the person says something back, and before you know it, you're screaming, you know, and you've just increased your anger. So really, it sounds simple, but it's really quite profound, especially if your habit is very strongly to say the words quickly, you know. If you're a person who's got more control over your mouth, then you're really admirable. But then the problem with you is, because in our culture, we don't, you know, we don't pay too much attention to the mind. So if you're one of the people who doesn't say what you feel, then you are suppressing, because we don't know any other method. We either suppress or we vomit, you know. So we have to cultivate the best one of all, which is want to control the mouth, not do the damage. But that needs practice. And then what we do with these thoughts, we hear them, we hear the story, but you have to hear what's going on in your own mind before it becomes really turbulent. Because once it's turbulent, you can't stop the mouth. It's out the mouth. So you've got to get it before it's turbulent. And that's what takes time. Because the impulse to say those words is so powerful, you know. So really the skill is we have more and more develop the practice to hear our own mind, to listen to the angry thoughts, and to literally have a conversation with them. But they have to be not turbulent, because once the thoughts are turbulent, you can't have a conversation, because you're so strongly committed to the anger. It's kind of like you're going at 100 miles an hour on the freeway. It's too late to turn back. So it takes a while, but this is the ideal level of practice. This is the ideal. First, determined to not say the words. And that really already takes a lot of mental effort, because it already implies that you're observing your thoughts before it gets to the mouth. If you don't notice the words until they get to the mouth, well, it's impossible not to say the words. So there's a lot of work we have to do. And so we've got to see the advantages of it. First of all, look at the advantage to yourself. Initially, we don't see any advantage. When we're fully committed to anger, saying the words, we only see that as the only advantage. We don't see any advantage in being silent, because anger is so strongly not fair, poor me, I've got to say these words and you're so bad, you know. So that's the obvious level. But, you know, maybe Lucy's not talking about vomiting out the words. When we're talking about the feeling as well of patience, well, that takes time. That takes time. And honestly, what that comes from, and this is the whole Buddhist psychological approach, you don't just, you know, we tend to think, you know, you read about some ugly kind of person, like a politician, and you don't like their policies. So we feel, and their policies might be really wrong. The person's action might be really wrong. So we feel that's always going to be the same. The person's always wrong, and I'm always going to be angry. So it's kind of like set in stone. And then we feel the only solution, we think what I have to do is just stop saying the words, but continue to be angry. No, this is the point. This is the point. What you're learning to do by changing the story in your mind is you're literally changing the interpretation of that ugly person. The person's policies are still ugly. They are still a mean person. They did beat you. They did steal from you. That's a fact. But what you're doing is changing the actual interpretation you have. So what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, if you're trying to be a Buddhist, one is, crucially, first step, you're trying to apply the teaching about karma. So let's say the person has harmed you. This is not uncommon. Every one of us in this room has people who have harmed us, or even now are harming us. There's no doubt about it. But let's say it's a person who has harmed you in the past, let's say. So that the fixed view in our mind is he was wrong, I didn't do that action, and in fact, you're correct, you didn't do it. So he is wrong. But we feel we've got to suppress it and all the time see him as wrong and just try and suppress. No, if you're really working on your mind and you're applying karma, slowly, you realize that you created the cause to have this person do those words. And so slowly, that view, and it takes time, enables you to put the emphasis more on yourself and realize due to your own past actions, you must have done something to cause this. So then you more and more take the responsibility rather than just this self-pity. How dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. Because literally those words are the view not of karma. So if you're having the view of karma, every time you think it through, it gets easier and easier and easier. And what happens is when you see this person and you recognize what they did, because you know why they did it, your whole view is different. It's not just that you don't express the thoughts. Your thoughts are now literally different. And then even eventually you can have compassion for that person. So you're actually reconfiguring the interpretations in your mind. That's what it means, giving up being angry. It's not just giving up vomiting and keeping your angry thoughts. You're even fundamentally changing your angry thoughts. That's quite profound. And that just takes time. So then, of course, the trouble is, being impatient is so common because, and let's analyze it again. What is it? Well, aversion, that ugly thing, go away, that's aversion. That's a mild level of anger. That's what anger is. Anger is, how dare that be there? That's an ugly sound. That's a horrible person. How dare you do that? You're not doing what I want. It's really common. That's aversion. So what is it? And we do the other analysis. We look at what is that the response to? And what it is internally is the response because our attachment isn't getting what it wants. Now, this is really hard to see, but this is the Buddhist analysis. We're all driven by this intense, continuous, constant craving to get what we want. We might be right in being, the thing that we are attached to might be to have a person stop being mean to us. Nothing wrong with that. But to be strongly attached to it means that when you don't get it, you have the panic attack of aversion. So the basis of aversion is attachment. And this is really hard to see because it's in all of us to the subtlest degree. The Buddha's view of attachment is it's so unbelievably subtle. And the craving to get what I want every second of the day is what drives all of us. It's hard to see it. It's surprising to us. It sounds brutal. So that's why we get angry, because attachment doesn't get what it wants. So the other work, one is to utilize the view of karma, interpret it completely differently, attempt to do that. But the other is to be observing this drive, it's so instinctive because we don't notice it. Before we know it, the words are out the mouth and we just realize we've got angry with the person because they didn't do what my attachment wanted. And so because life is difficult and we're surrounded by kids and husbands and dramas and traffic and crazy people, it isn't so easy. But this is the analysis. So there's the two. Apply the karmic one, and then the one of understanding the aversion is the response to the attachment, not getting what it wants. Because attachment's a junkie in us that's there all the time. Even if we're kind, nice people, it's still there. Some of us have volatile aversion, some have mild aversion. And for those who have more subtle aversion, and those who have more subtle aversion, that turns into depression. Because, you're not getting what you want every day. Every day we have pain. Every day we have annoying people. Every day we have the traffic light being red. Every day we don't get the food that we need. Every day that we're tired. That's always attachment not getting what it wants. So attachment and aversion, we're running between them like 1,000 times a day, but at quite subtle levels that we do not notice. So as we practice, we keep noticing these at an ever more subtle level. This is real internal practice. Every single day, and it gets ever more subtle, our awareness of it. So then we get ever more control over the thought processes because aversion is rooted in being a thought, an interpretation, how dare that happen to me? And attachment is only I got to get the nice things. I only deserve the nice things. I only deserve the nice things. This sounds kind of heavy, but it's really true. Attachment and aversion are these misconceptions rooted in the wrong sense of self. So it's quite subtle to see this, but this is the analysis every single day, I tell you. What do you think, Lucy?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm a long sufferer of speaking before thinking.
There you go, darling. Exactly. That's right.
So I've spent years kind of calming my temper down, but not doing the second part, not letting it go, not changing it internally, like you said.
That's the key, and I think that's something
Yeah.
we just sort of don't see often in our world, because we often think it's good to be angry and it's healthy to be angry, but we don't have the subtler ways of changing the actual, because anger is actually an interpretation. You understand?
Yeah.
Do you understand that? So the thing is this, so that the interpretation doesn't mean that you're wrong in saying the person punched you in the nose. They did punch you in the nose. The person was mean to you. That's not the interpretation that's wrong. It's more, how dare they do that to me? I don't deserve it. And that's where the karmic one comes in, which is really quite hard to apply, because that's not our typical view, you know. Or
Yeah.
even the one of kindness. I mean, you know, even people, some people, let's say their kid beats, you know, shouts at them. If you really have compassion for your child, you won't get angry with the child. You'll understand. You'll know. Or if somebody's kind of like, you know, you'll understand, so you won't get angry. But it's only, we just have to, you know, my darling, it's a slowly. And the key to success, that's why we need a little bit of practice, even 5 minutes in the morning, just sitting quiet, watching your breath, stabilizing your mind for a few minutes. Because when you're just doing something like concentration meditation for a few minutes, just watching your boring old breath, the thoughts are going to be there all the time. You can't help that, but you sort of notice them out of the corner of your eye. And that's really helpful when you open your eyes and get back into your kitchen. And then suddenly you start to not just notice the annoying husband, but you also notice your thoughts. So that's the skill we have to develop. And then we have these little conversations with ourselves, you know, but that can only happen before the thoughts are too strong. Once they become emotional, the energy, we're committed already to anger and it's too late. So it just takes practice, darling, constant.
Thank you.
Good, Lucy. Everyone's the same, darling. I believe it. Believe me. Hello, Linda. Yeah.
Could you repeat what you said about the karma with that anger, like before it gets out?
I understand. The karmic one is, it's quite difficult for some. I don't know, Linda, whether you have the view of karma, but it's quite a difficult one. But this is a classic Buddhist one, you know. And in a way, it's like it's quite difficult because it's not the view we have. It's a shocking view, in fact, to think that, well, I must have harmed the person in the past, because we don't have that view in our ordinary world. So that might not be something that person would particularly want to apply. It's only if you have a Buddhist view and you've decided this is the view of the world that you're taking. And that's why it's also good with karmic one. When good things happen, it's really good to remember, wow, I must have created the cause for all this. This is the fruit of my past virtue. Then we can start to be happy about receiving good things, because we tend to think things come out of the blue. We tend to think things are good luck and bad luck, you know, but the Buddhist view is, no, it's a natural law. This karmic view, our consciousness goes back and back. Good things happen and bad things happen. And the Buddha puts us squarely in the center of those experiences. We've sort of set ourselves up for the bad ones, and we've set ourselves up for the good ones. So it's up to whether we have that view about karma or not. It can be quite difficult for us to have that view. Do you understand? I mean, we have to decide that's a view we want to work with. We don't have to. That's us. That's our choice, you know. I mean, that's why I talk extreme examples. Why it was good to always give extreme examples. So, you know, like a typical Buddhist in Tibet has this view of karma very strongly. They're brought up with it. It's their worldview. That, I mean, it's been in Asia for thousands of years. It's just a bit, we're not used to it in the you know, in the materialist world, in the Christian Jewish world. So on the other hand, it's not true, actually. I remember doing in a conference in Miami, and the topic was, why do bad things happen to good people? And there was me, a Catholic, a Lutheran, and a rabbi. It sounds like a joke. Always sounds like a joke, about to tell a joke, but it wasn't. It was real. And so the two Christians gave their discussion. I don't really understand their answer, But I know when I gave my answer, I talked all about karma, how we have past lives, and any negative things we do, unless we clean it up, are going to ripen as our future suffering, and all the good things will ripen as happiness. That's the Buddha's view. So I remember that the rabbi, he clapped. He said, oh, we have the same view. He was a Kabbalah rabbi. And he said they have the view of reincarnation. So I think it was quite a surprise to most of the Jews in the audience. But that's even in the Jewish religion. The Kabbalah rabbis, the Kabbalah Jewish people, they talk about reincarnation and karma. And he said we have a saying: every time something bad happens, we say, "Great, one less debt to repay." So it's not totally only the Buddhists who have this view. It's kind of interesting. So the whole one of karma, of course, implies previous lives. It implies previous lives, and the Buddhist view fundamentally, this is the Buddhist picture, that we're not just made by our mummy and daddy. We're not made by a creator. We don't come out of nothing. We are the product of our own past. We produce ourselves, basically. Our happiness and our suffering are the consequences of our own past kind of programming, if you like. So in the Buddhist one, we are in the center of the responsibility of it. So in this story I often tell, people have heard it many times. These young Tibetan nuns, in 2003, when I went to New York, Richard Gere invited the Dalai Lama, and he invited about 20 former prisoners, all of whom were talking about all their suffering in prison. And he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns. And they were telling their story about being imprisoned, sexually abused, tortured. Pretty intense experience. And they were not angry. It was very evident to everybody. They weren't angry, And that's a shock to us in the modern world, because we feel, that there's no explanation why somebody would harm you. There's no logic in our teachings. There's no logic in the materialist teachings. Of course there's not. Why someone would abuse you if you've never met them. That's very clearly, a shocking thing to do. So we'd consider anger as a healthy response. So anyway, the Buddhist view is that these young women were telling the story, and they were sad, but there was no anger, because they don't, you see, anger's saying, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. That's very evident, isn't it? We know that thought, the outrage when bad things happen, and we can't see any indication of anything we did right now to cause it to happen. It's really very shocking. But for these Buddhists, you've got countless past lives, you've met countless people in the past, you've done countless good and bad actions. So the logic of karma is whatever you experience moment by moment, the happy experiences are the fruit of your virtue, and the unhappy experiences are the fruit of your harming and your own negativity. Given that we've all got both. So it's not a shocking idea for people who've got the view of karma. It's just the philosophy they have. So that takes a while for us if we're used to being Christian or Jewish, unless you're a Kabbalah Jew. So it's a shock for us. We have to really practice. But these young women are brought up with karma. That's the view of their culture, and has been for 1,200 years. And it's been in India before that. So that's just the world view those people have. They've internalized it. So in that sense, they didn't have anger, which saying, why is this happening to us? We don't deserve it. They don't have that view. So they had pain, they had suffering. They would happily have left that prison. Thank you very much. So then at the end of but the thing is, they would have seen it as part of their practice, so then one of them then said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers, because we knew we must have harmed them in the past. But also, and this is the point about karma as the basis of real compassion, because we also know that because of the actions they've done to us, that they will suffer in the future. So the Buddhist view is it's not punishment, because there's no punisher, there's no creator, there's no rewarder. It's a natural law. This really takes us time, but this is the fundamental Buddhist view about why things happen. It's a natural law that runs the universe. So working on this as a basis of our practice is absolutely what we as Buddhists would attempt to do, Do you understand, Linda?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Thank you.
All right, darling. Well, who was that? Yes, Alona. What's happening, darling? Alona. Good.
Hello, Venerable.
Hello,
Thank you for your teaching.
Good.
I have a question about anticipation.
Yeah.
When my mind gets tight, I use anticipation to quickly get out of the tightness. But then I heard your teachings about anticipation, and it's as I understood, is a part of craving. So
So why
I
don't you tell me
wonder,
an example, sweetheart?
well, if I'm at work and I feel my mind is very tight, like and I feel uncomfortable, I was like, I observe this and I'm aware of it. So I think I'm too tight. Oh, I'm gonna have a nice dinner, and it's like I let
I
because
understand.
I am
Okay, that's
aware of.
interesting. No, that's good. Okay, that's. I mean, it's interesting. It's a kind of a very practical method, of course, to help you loosen up. It's okay. I mean, so if you're using it as a method to help you relax, then okay, there's nothing wrong. But if you look at what attachment is, honey child, attachment, its nature is always to be dissatisfied with what I've got at the moment, always. So therefore, one of the functions is to anticipate. Look forward to something. So and that's automatic. So you're bored, let's say you're bored with work and then you start fantasizing about dinner, or we're always anticipating something. Attachment, one of its functions is to cling to something that's nice, then get aversion, which is what your mind is doing there. Your mind gets tight. So then you look forward to something nice. So as long as you're conscious of it, because the fact is you could hop in the car to go home for the exciting dinner and then have a crash, or dinner's not in the fridge. So then you get disappointed again. So it's okay to use it as kind of interesting tool. It's a good tool to use to help you loosen your mind. That's okay, nothing wrong, but observe the way attachment is, it's helpful. That's an interesting point.
Yes, I observe. I'm out of it. I'm not in it. I just want to snap out of it. So I use that as a snapping out of it. Exactly.
I understand that. I understand that.
Can I ask you one more thing, please?
Yes.
You were talking about low rig, and
When?
I have never. So I'm Googled it. So
I haven't
what
talked
is
about
this?
it today. So what do
No.
you hear me talk about it?
I would like maybe you can recommend where I can start.
Lots
It's
of
a book
courses.
or teaching or what is?
Lots of the courses, lots of the centers teach this as part of their basic program, or sometimes it'll be a course. Maybe at some of the centers, you've got to look around to see who. It's the text, the classical text that's used in the monasteries as the basis for studying the mind in more depth. So I think you've just got to look around at the centers. I mean, check out Thupten Norby Ling, see if they've got it on their schedule at some point. Maybe you can email the spiritual program coordinator there and see if he plans to teach it at some point. I think that's the best way to do it. I can't tell you immediately any centers that I know, but it's always around, it's always around. So I think just investigate, see who's going to be teaching. Maybe you start with Thupten Norby Ling and ask Venerable Dondrup, the monk, who's the SPC, and ask him if we plan to do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good, darling. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Who else? What else, people? What else is there?
Venerable Robina, there's a question in chat, and the person wants to be anonymous.
Okay.
If we take ownership of things that happen in a relationship and actively work to transform our interpretation of blaming the other, how will we know if we should leave the relationship?
That's a very good question. Yeah. I think no matter what the relationship, no matter whether you leave it or stay, I think exactly those words you said were so perfect. To look at your own role, observe your own delusions, understand the karma of it. That's anyway whether you stay or go, you should do that. But I think the one about whether you should stay or go is really is related to somehow, is there something here that's worthwhile? Is there something here that, even if you check for yourself, and this could be exactly the same as a job, because in the end, whether a job, a relationship with your mum, a relationship with your husband, it really comes down to two choices. Because we're always interacting with others, aren't we? And that's where our suffering so often is, and where our happiness so often is, in relation to others. So when it comes to it, either, if things go wrong in the job and you start to analyze it, the boss is horrible, you're not, or the job is just not satisfying you, there's nothing good in the job, then you've got to decide, check the job carefully, take your responsibility, look at your own side, look at your aversion, look at whatever it is, and then see, is there something here I could learn? Is there something here that's good for me, both internally, or is there something I could learn externally? And if there is, and it's worthwhile, you'll get something from it, then you stay and you make it worthwhile. Because sometimes, let's say, you really can't change your job. There's really not many other opportunities. You've got husbands and children to take care of. So you really got to look carefully. And then if you really feel you can't leave that job, then you need to find good things about it. You need to see it as part of your practice, which is either learning to work with your patients, learning to be more kind, or learning maybe there's something more technical in the job that is good for you, even if you're bored. So you've got to really see there's something worthwhile that causes you to then say, okay, I'll stay. Because if you're going to stay and yet still be miserable, you will go crazy. That's the point. You are now, if there's nothing worthwhile, or you really can't cope with it, it's really difficult. The person's so crazy, maybe your partner or the boss is so mean, or the colleagues are so difficult, you just can't deal with it, then you decide to go. So it's up to you to know, is there something I can work with this? So, so if you have to stay, you've got to change your mind. If you really find it's too difficult, then you go. And in the end, there are precisely one or the other of these options. It's kind of intense to think of it this way. And the trouble in our culture or our lives is we become impotent and I hate the job. I hate the boss. It's totally miserable. Every day you go crazy. And then your friend says, well, Robina, you could try and change your mind and try and find something good about it. No, can't do that. Can't do that. Not possible. It's an ugly job. Well, you could try and leave the job. No, can't do that. Won't get another job. So in the end, we make zero choices and we go crazy. So and I think if you really are clear, you take responsibility, on your part due to karma, blah, blah, blah. But if you really feel it's impossible and there's no growth in this, then you leave. And if you really can't leave, this is my point in prison, my friends in prison, they don't have the luxury of two choices. They have one choice, change their mind or go mad. That's it, honey. So be brave. But don't have to be a martyr. We've got this the strong kind of Christian view is that marriage or relationships is forever. Even especially when you've got children, it feels almost paralyzing. Like, how could I ever leave? But I mean, if the karma's finished, the karma's finished. And there's nothing there anymore. There's no benefit in staying. It's crazy to stay. And this is where you've got to have courage. I mean, some people leave their children, especially if it's a woman, that's considered the worst sin in the universe. But it might be the right thing to do. You've got to have courage to really want to do what's most beneficial, to want to do the right thing, and then have the courage to take the risk to do it. We've got to have courage for that because we get very criticized. So we have to have fearlessness to make these decisions. So just every day aspire, may I do what is most beneficial? If you can, that's the answer. I mean, there's food for thought there. Yes, Carol.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you. Is gender determined by karma?
Absolutely. Everything's determined by karma. The shape we are, what organs we have, hair this way, nose that way, a hole or a penis, whatever we've got. Of course, it's all karma. Everything is due to karma. This is kind of interesting, when there's no concept of God making us like this or some kind of accident. Everything is the result, the shape, the form, whether human, animal, whatever, it's all due to karma. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. That's where it's interesting these days, isn't it? I mean, this is where, and sometimes, I think some people hear this as a criticism, but it's not, it's just the way Buddhism is describing, the way Buddha is describing. That everything is due to karma, but also because we're all driven by dissatisfaction. We've got to see that, And so someone who wakes up in this life and really feels, so many people talk this way now, that they feel like a girl, but they're in a boy's body. I mean, it's a common experience. That's not criticism. It shows the depth of our dissatisfaction. It shows the depth of suffering of past attachment. Why we're dissatisfied with anything is because of past attachment. It's not meant to be a criticism of transgender, of anybody, homosexual, whatever it is we label as our definition, It's if we're dissatisfied with it, this is due to our past karma that we're dissatisfied. And you might feel like a girl in a boy's body, and you might feel like a boy in a girl's body. Completely not impossible. Because, but the why we have a situation, whether the situation is the boyfriend you've got, whether the situation is the mother you've got, whether the situation is the temper, is the climate you're born into, the body is the same. Whether, because all external, a body is external, the weather's external, your mother's external. So we can see we get born into lots of situations that are terrible, that we're very dissatisfied. We're born into a poor family, we're dissatisfied. We're born into an ugly family. We're born into a family where we're kind of imprisoned. We're born into an ugly environment. It's all due to past karma. So of course we're dissatisfied with it. Now, of course, if we can change, how marvelous. If you've got the ability to change your body, you've got the ability to change your boyfriend, okay, but don't get too caught up and think now you've found happiness, because dissatisfaction will then find something else to be dissatisfied about. So as long as we understand the bigger picture and its attachment, I mean, because there's nothing intrinsic about a penis or a vagina or a breast or a high voice or a low voice. Or, I mean, there's not. It shows it's all about attachment. Whatever we are is about attachment. Heterosexual, homosexual, whatever the labels are. They're all just these labels we put on us. This is not a political statement. This is the Buddhist analysis of minds and how we create our experiences. So it's kind of interesting analysis to have. Nothing wrong with changing something. Whether it brings satisfaction, that is another discussion. We have to look. That was just a few comments there. I remember somebody who is transgender hearing this, and they were shattered and thought I was criticizing transgender. This is universal. This is not to do with transgender or anybody else. It's universal. That if we are dissatisfied with what we are, and I think our problem is, we tend to concretize, because we concretize male and female, we concretize those, then equally we'll concretize the opposite, I should be the other one. It might be true, but meanwhile, who created the cause for you to have a penis and feel like a girl? You did. Who created the cause for you to be a girl but want a penis? You did. As long as we own responsibility that we are the cause of being born as a girl wanting a penis, and we're born with a penis wanting to be a girl, no one has done it to us. But I think the dualistic view of either a creator or that someone else somehow makes us, someone makes us. Nobody makes us. We make ourselves. This is kind of a profound concept. So then, no one to blame. No one to blame. Look into our mind, understand it, see our attachment, see our aversion, see our fears. If we can change something, fine, nothing wrong. But if we can't, sometimes it's quite difficult, isn't it? Like my friends in prison. Anyway, that was a few comments there about attachment and karma. Someone else. I think the suffering too is very interesting. Is another point. In the world like these days, it's really kind of fairly. It's not totally. It's fairly acceptable to be gay now. But I remember, like we know. I mean, the law, you'd get hanged or whatever for being gay in certain cultures, and our own culture as well. There's no question. So the suffering from this, is because we're not getting accepted. We all yearn to be accepted. We all yearn to be approved of, and this is just the deepest attachment in the universe. The deepest attachment we all have is to be approved of. So this is the tragedy. If you're born, that's what, race, gender, everything. If you're born in a culture where another group is predominant and you're in the low group, I mean, of course you go crazy. If you're born in a racist culture, and you're born a different color, you'll be unbearably suffering because you're not the right group. So if you're born in a culture where heterosexuality is considered, and especially in religion, where it's considered God made you and you're weird if you're not, of course you're going to be devastated because you're not being accepted. This is our greatest suffering. But again, who created the cause for us to be who we are? Who created the cause for us to be born in a group that doesn't like us? Who we did. When we own the karmic one, it's very powerful. Then we can become more accountable and we can become more responsible and we become more content with who we are, whether we're approved of or not. Yeah, there's some comments there. Because you see, the Buddhist view is, that's what I know when I first met the Buddhist teachings, and I'd been kind of a really radical lefty political activist, and then a really very radical feminist activist, seriously so, in the 70s, right? And that was a very powerful identity for me. I'd been, you know, at some point in my feminist political activity, I was a radical lesbian feminist, you know. It was a very strong identity, very powerful identity. And it was necessary at the time because women, you know, we all still, nothing much changed. We still see, you know, white men still run the show. Well, not all of them, but you know, get my point. I'm making kind of political statements. But it was really intense on me. And then I bumped into these Tibetan lamas and heard the Buddhist teachings. It was a shock to me because I realized, I mean, the view of reincarnation to me kind of made sense. So I realized, I've been a boy in countless lives. So where's this female Robina gone? It's just a momentary package, you know? I strongly identify with this female one. So if we're transgender, we strongly identify with that one. Or if we're gay, we strongly, that's why because if we've been suppressed, I mean, look at all the gay movement, you know, I was involved with that in Australia. Of course, you have to stand up for yourself and you know, and get approval. But when you realize you've been every gender possible in past lives, and as well as animals, you know, there's nothing much to hold on to. And I realized, well, who created the cause for me to be female? Who created the cause for me to be mistreated sexually by men, which is usually what happens, you know, men, people don't go out at night afraid of meeting a woman who might abuse them. Even men don't go out at night because they're afraid of men who will abuse them. It's just the karma of us. We've all got this same karma. So it was really quite sobering for me when I first heard the teachings about karma and reincarnation. We all create ourselves, you know. So then, I mean, couldn't have too much going on about how dare men do this to me. I mean, I must have done it to them, you know, so you get sort of just back and forth. So it's taking responsibility and realizing, and the real one that seemed to me with the Buddhist view about the mind, consciousness, mind is neither male, female, human, or anything else. They're just temporary packages due to our past karma that we get born in, you know. The fundamental nature of mind is clear and pure and beyond gender. It is wisdom and compassion. They're the fundamental qualities of every being. Wisdom and compassion, beyond gender, beyond male, beyond female, beyond all those labels. They're all just packages that we have created karmically over many, many lifetimes, you know. That's the Buddhist approach. That was helpful for my mind when I first started to think about that. What else, people? Any other questions?
There's a question in the chat, Venerable Robina. They wish to remain anonymous. If we continually offer victory to others and start to feel anger arising and being taken advantage of, when is it time to speak out at work? Excuse me, you're muted.
Level of practice, the one of taking the blame, it's quite advanced, you know. I mean, we can't take it lightly. It's not just like a practice that's set in stone. It's like saying the practice is to run 10 kilometers without getting exhausted. You've got to do lots and lots of work before you're capable of doing that. That's exactly the same here. You've got to be a suitable vessel from having done the earlier internal work. So if you're in a relationship where you're abused and you're a victim and you've got a lot of pain and suffering and struggling to deal with yourself, your job is not to take the blame. I'm very sorry. You've got to know where you're at and what is appropriate. Because if you take the blame and you continue to be angry, it's not authentic. No, authentic's okay. We can always try to practice. So if you really are trying to practice it, and you do take the blame, but then you work with the anger if you can. But if it depends on where you are at, you have to know where you're at. Because if you're going to try to do that practice, you really try to do it, and then you don't have to say anything. But if you feel you're not, and even if you are advanced and can take the blame, it still doesn't mean that's always the right thing to do. Maybe the right thing is to speak up, but without anger, for the sake of the other person. That's the real point. Often we say we have to speak up because we don't want other people to be abused. That's not a really good reason. It's got to be, if you're going to speak up to the other person, you either take the blame and you really make it your practice and you just let it go, or it's genuinely for the sake of the other. You don't, if it's coming from anger, that is not a valid motivation. So you've got to know what you're capable of. These are quite tricky practices, you know, not just being a holy saint and just, you know, and many people are like that, but that's not really taking the blame. They just become victims and then they get walked over, you know, and people abuse them and take advantage of them. And the reason we get taken advantage of isn't because we've got this noble wish to take the blame, it's because we have attachment and aversion and feel like a victim. Many people sit there quietly, don't say a word. That's not valid taking the blame at all. That's fear. So you've got to know where it's coming from. It's got to be coming from a valid place because it's a good practice for you. And it's really got to be light, you know. It's difficult sometimes, but when other times, if it's just going to come from anger, there's no benefit. And if you're going to speak up, it's got to be for the sake of the other. There's many different variations of it. It's not just an absolute thing, you know. So we have to know where we're at. We have to know what we're capable of, you know. It's very important. I hope that's helpful. What else, people?
Linda, did you want to ask a question? If you'd like to unmute.
Yes.
Good, Linda.
I want to know about anger and not being patient when you see someone harming someone else.
Good, Linda. It's a really good point. It's exactly, it's all part of what we're talking about. So, okay. If we have the view of karma, okay, if we take the view of karma, it's a classic example. Let's say you see somebody kicking a dog, let's say. So clearly, kicking anybody is not appropriate behavior. It's unethical behavior. And if you can, so that's a typical example, isn't it, of when we would get angry. We'd get angry with the guy and we'd have compassion for the dog. Now, the really valid approach to have, if we're really practiced, Linda, having the view of karma, you would immediately protect the dog, but you also genuinely have compassion for the guy because you don't want him to create negative karma. It's a bit like a mother for her child. A mother really loves her child and she can see this kid is crazy. So she will really be disciplined with that child, but not out of anger, but because she's trying to protect the child from harming themselves. That's the attitude, but we've got to cultivate that view, you know. It's not just for the sake of the innocent victim. It also should be the sake of the person doing the harm, because you don't want them to harm themselves. We can understand it with a child, you know. So that's the attitude if we really have the view of karma. Of course, that's a very courageous attitude to have, you know. Because the fact of the matter is, this is the very first level of Buddhist practice. If we look into our own lives, Linda, we might not kick dogs, we might not rape and kill people, but we can all see, we get angry, we shoot our mouth off, we get, you know, you understand, we do negative things. We're maybe in a mild level, but we can all see that when we shout at somebody out of our own anger, one, we harm them, but we know we harm ourselves. Isn't it true? That anger can only harm us. So when we really know that our anger harms us and my being angry with somebody else also happens to harm them, so then, but we've got to recognize first that we're harming ourselves, and we often skip over that. So when we really know that my anger and my jealousy and my depression harm me, and they are why I do anything at all to harm others. When we know that, we will genuinely have compassion for a person who harms others. But compassion isn't sentimental. Compassion can be very fierce, can be very strong. We have a very weak view of compassion, I think. I mean, they talk about the courageous compassion of the bodhisattvas. It's not just for the victims, it's for everybody, because we're all harming ourselves and others. Like a really firm, good parent is a good example. You get the point?
Yeah.
So don't hesitate, speak up. But often what happens, Linda, I remember, what was it, one time, if you try and intervene with two people fighting, and you tell them, you know, you try to protect, they'll tell you to go away and mind your own business, and they'll keep on fighting.
Yes.
Because when there's anger between two people, they're so caught up in the story, they don't want anybody to interfere. So sometimes we can interfere and there's no benefit, you know, it doesn't help. So we have to have the wisdom to know when to intervene, when to try and stop something, because often you can't stop it. But it's really important. The bigger picture is the karmic one, but even more, not even the karmic one, just to really know our own minds well enough and know that when I'm angry, it harms me. When I know my anger harms me, I know then it harms other people when they're angry. So having that awareness is very strong. So then our wish to benefit isn't just based on being angry with the guy and compassion for the dog. It's both. It's compassion for both. Do you understand my point or not?
Yes,
That's
yes, yes.
a good point, isn't it? Exactly. Thanks.
Thanks for the reminder for me
Yeah, there you go, darling. Exactly. That's right.
about me being angry about somebody hurting somebody.
Yeah,
I
that's right. No, that's also, that's the thing we've really got to be looking at. Often because our trouble is we feel so righteous, you know, but it's really very humbling to look at that. We need to look at that. And so there's nothing wrong with pointing someone else's fault out. There's nothing wrong with intervening, but not from anger and that righteousness, because it's not going to work.
It
In
doesn't.
other words, being patient doesn't mean being passive. That's a really important point. Being and not being angry doesn't mean you don't speak out.
Yes, yes.
It's got to come from a different place. That's the point. Yeah. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
All right. A few more minutes left. What else is there? Nothing? Anybody?
I have a question about karma.
Yes, good, darling. Talk to me.
Let's say there were two humans in one life and one hurt the other. And then in their next life, like not killed, but hurt.
Uh-huh.
And then in their next lives, they both come back as humans.
Mm-hmm.
And you've said that karma is personal.
Yes.
But personal means one-on-one with the same person, or the result is personal, like you'll have the same
No, I understand.
result.
Let's analyze it.
Yeah.
If you in this life build up a very strong relationship with one person, then there's a big history there, isn't there? There's a big history there. And if let's say you haven't seen them for 5 years and you see them again, that history is still very strongly there, you know. Well, it's the same from life to life. It's very personal insofar as if you see there's 4 ways that karma, well, in this life, there are 3 ways our karma plays out. And one particular way is called experiences similar to the cause. So that means any way you relate to other people. So in this life, we know we might bump into one person and they immediately appear very nice to us. And we have a lovely relationship. That has to be personal, because the way you see that person, the way they look pretty to you, is not just a random event. It's the karma of that person is that you have been kind to them in the past. So that's why they appear nice to you. So it's really very personal. You can't just randomly see any person as ugly or beautiful. That's coming from our own relationships. Absolutely. It's very personal.
With that person, the history with that person.
That's my whole point. In other words, if you and I have never met in a past life, it will be impossible for you to suddenly think I'm beautiful. The only reason you meet me and see me as beautiful is, one, due to my past kindness to you, so that now you recognize me again, like your friend from 5 years ago. Straight away you recognize me. And if I'm your ex-husband from 5 years ago, as soon as you see my face again, you will remember everything. You'll see me as ugly, you know. So exactly the same here from past lives. While we bump into each other at all, we've got strong history with each other. And the quality of how we see each other now is dependent on the karma we had with each other. And that's why you've been kind. You have a relationship where you're really loving for 5 years, and then suddenly it changes. And now you become the worst enemies. So we've got all the karma in the same relationship. We've got a lot of good karma and bad. No, it is very personal, very personal.
Yes, that makes sense.
So
yes, I do.
You see, there's 2 things going on. One is we've got strong history with each other. So that's why if we are in a relationship, we've got the history to be together. So it's an opportunity to purify it. It's an opportunity to fix it, to learn to take responsibility, to learn to forgive the other person, to learn to see them as good. And then if you leave each other, fine, but you've cleaned it up, you know, you've cleaned it up. So it's an opportunity to clean up a relationship if you've got it, because you've got a history with each other, and then it's up to us to lift it up or lift it down, you know. Do you understand?
Yes. Yes, yes, that's very clear. Thank you.
Good. All right, darling people, it's time to go. 1 hour gone like a dream. But as always, we cover plenty of ground. So lots of food for thought. So let's just keep moving, never give up, process all this information, attempt to practice it, attempt to have some, patience towards ourselves first. Once we're patient with ourselves, it's easy to be patient with other people. Once we realize we're all human with problems and good qualities and bad qualities, we won't be so brutal with ourselves, and then we're not so brutal with other people. So be patient with yourself, Lucy. Start with Lucy and end with Lucy. Okay, darling. Much love, everybody. Thank you so much, Lou. Thank you very much.